I want to thank all of you fellows for the services that we've enjoyed this morning. The inspiration that comes from the thoughts that you have both in your prayers and in your comments. It is so good to be someplace where I get filled as well. And that, I'll tell you, is sometimes not the case. When you're preaching the gospel, sometimes it is a constant outflow and not much returned. But I'll tell you, since I've been here, you folks have filled me full, and I thoroughly love you for it. One of the things that I so much enjoy about worshiping here is the coordination, whether it's conscious or not, from the song service to what I'm going to be preaching about. My sermon this morning was entitled, "The Fear of the Lord is the Beginning of Knowledge." I think that's what it was. Sometimes I forget. But the fear of the Lord. And I think about that and the concept of fear and how John tells us that perfect love casts out fear, that you can't be perfected by fear. But I'll tell you what, fear does start the process. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. I don't think we can really start learning until we have a concept of who God is, what God expects of us. And in this passage that Jake read, I want to back up to it and look at a couple of things before we move on to something else. But in this passage, in the beginning of Proverbs, as it first starts out, he says the Proverbs, or the sayings of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding. If I were to give wisdom a definition, just me, I would call it understanding. I would think that having knowledge doesn't help you unless you know how to apply it, unless you have a sense of how it works in the world. And if you read the book of Proverbs, everything in this book has to do with either our relationship to God or our relationship with one another. It's basically a book about understanding what works, what doesn't work. And as he goes on in these Proverbs, we're going to see how he's going to lay it out for us and help us to understand that wisdom is out there for everyone. It's available to everybody. You have access to it regardless of what station in life you're born to or rise to. You have access to wisdom. In chapter 2, where Jake also read, writing to children, but he says, "My son, if you will receive my words and treasure my commandments within you, make your ear attentive to wisdom, incline your heart to understanding." Do you know what understanding is? How do we get words like that? Understanding. That's kind of an interesting word. The concept of it comes from bearing something up, holding something up, like a pillar. I used to joke and say, I am a very wise man, because I've got size 13 feet. That is a good understanding. Standing under me. I have a good foundation upon which to support my body. That's the basic meaning of understanding. A foundation under it to hold it up. In other words, what you know, is it based on a good, solid foundation? Because this book of Proverbs, not just the book of Proverbs, but the whole of the Bible, is a light shining to enlighten us into what works and what doesn't work. I want you to go back to the very origin of this concept, the concept of enlightenment. I want you to go back to Genesis chapter 1 and verse 3. We've read this many times, but I want to keep coming back to it because it is the start of everything. If God wanted to build a universe, and He wanted to have all of this interactive stuff in this universe, and I'm not just talking about gravity and planets and stars and galaxies. I'm not just talking about that. I'm talking about the minuteness of our universe. I was talking with a friend of mine, one of the places where I'm going to hold a meeting when I'm gone, in Kentucky, Beattyville, Kentucky, the giant city of Beattyville. It's about 5 people. A little more than that, but it's a very, very small town. One of the brightest couples, man and wife, I have ever known in my life live there. They're both nuclear physicists. One's a nuclear engineer. The other's a physicist. And they have retired back in his little hometown of Beattyville, Kentucky. But he made the statement to me one time. We were on a week-long junket to learn about everything that has to do with science and the Bible. And we were sitting one night and we were looking up at the stars, and I'm telling you, they were just up in Alberta, Canada. You could see every star in the sky, and they were just so bright and brilliant, and so many of them. I was in awe of the number of stars out there, and I said, it looks like it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. He says, yeah, but you know what? In the field that I work in, nuclear physics, he says, we're discovering that it goes down and smaller to the same degree that it goes out and gets bigger. He said, it just, the more we find, the more we realize that this is just more than we can handle. We don't even know where to go with it. He says, and the people who don't start with an understanding that all of this has a grand design to it, they're going down blind alleys right and left trying to figure things out, and they have to come back out of those blind alleys because they didn't believe in God to begin with. He says it's very much an advantage to start with the fact that all of this has a meaning, a design behind it. Now, let me show you the design as we look in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 3. Here it says, then God said, let there be light. And there was light. The amazing thing about this is that it's not talking about that. Because that is not going to happen for another 4 days. He's not going to create the generators of light like the sun and the moon and the stars. All of that's going to come on the 4th day. But right here he says, let there be. And then he says, light. And there was light. But I want you to stop right here and let's go over to John chapter 1, the Gospel of John, where here it says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through Him, and apart from Him, nothing came into being that has come into being. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. There came a man sent from God whose name was John. He came to bear witness about the light, so that all men might believe through him. He was not the light, but he came to testify about the light. There was the true light which coming into the world enlightens every man. I maintain that what God created back in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 3 were all of the works and don't works, all of the rules of order by which everything else was going to be made, all of the laws that would become what we live by and what we depend on every day. The laws that makes the sun come up at the right time, actually doesn't come up, we come into it. But all of those rules of order that makes everything function the way it functions, and you can count on it just like people have counted on it for 9,000 years perhaps. They work. They work every time. They work without hesitation. They work without constant repair. They work because they are the law. They are the light. Now, you and I live in a world where we have access to all the information that makes things work and not work. The thing is that not everybody accesses that information equally. Some people go after it like it is absolutely necessary for the next breath. Others, not so much. In this particular context where he's talking about Jesus coming into the world, he came into the world as Word. That's an interesting word. It's one of those kind of words that when you stop and look at the origin of it, we've talked about it before, that it comes from the Greek word logos, which means the expression of thought, or the expressor of thought in this particular case. Because it says, in the beginning was the Word, the expressor of thought. He was with God and He was God. And everything that was made through this person called Word. Now, it also says that later on, He left that position in heaven to come to this earth not as the creator of all things, but to come as a servant. Philippians 2 tells us that He emptied Himself from that to become like you and me. And He did that not to give up His job as Word, because still in this human body He was living out an explanation of God. Every day, every word, every movement was somehow explaining to the people around Him what God was all about. To the point that when Thomas finally understood who He was, Jesus said, "Come here and touch my side. Come here and see the holes. Feel them. Realize that it is me. That it is I, the I am." And Thomas finally recognized all of that, and he said, "My Lord and my God." He finally realized who this was. He realized that before this person had become Jesus, the Son of Mary, the Son of God, that He was the Creator of all things. The one who said in the very beginning, "Let there be all of these rules of order," and they came into existence. He came to explain that. Now, in the book of Proverbs, Proverbs doesn't deal a lot with religious matters. Proverbs deals with what works and what doesn't work. He deals with relationships between men and sometimes between God. But he talks about what will get you into trouble and what will keep you out of trouble. He talks about the work ethic. He talks about all kinds of things that if you're seeking to understand what makes this world go round, if you seek to understand the big wheel of life, you can get it from the book of Proverbs. Because he'll tell you, you do this, you're going to pay the price. You want to not pay that price, do this. If you want to understand how to live life and have the least amount of trouble, the book of Proverbs is filled with those kind of things. It is enlightenment in the highest degree. Now, I want us to go to the New Testament because I want to see something. As we go over here and we look in the book of 1 Peter, let's go back to where we read earlier. In 1 Peter chapter 1, actually we were reading this in class. In 1 Peter chapter 1, where he talks about in verse 22 of chapter 1, since you have in obedience to the truth. Truth is a very important thing. Since you have in obedience to the truth purified your souls for a sincere love of the brethren, fervently love one another from the heart. Now, let's go on down to chapter 2 and verse 1. Because here's where he starts laying out the information that we need to follow as newborn babes in Christ. He says, therefore, putting aside all malice. Now, back in the book of Proverbs, you're going to learn a lot about things like malice and deceit and hypocrisy and envy and slander, but you're not going to learn it from a religious standpoint. In Proverbs, he's going to teach it that you are not going to be a good neighbor. You're not going to be a good citizen. You're not going to be a good employee by having these characteristics. And he goes in Proverbs to show how each one of these things will hurt you. Hurt you. I mean, it'll hurt you. He goes on in here, as a newborn babe in Christ now. He says, put aside malice and deceit and hypocrisy and envy and slander like newborn babies. Because that's what we are. That's what we are when we go down into that water and we come out as a brand new, spanking clean soul. Born again. We start off with a need to put on and to take off. The things we take off are things like this. Things like malice and deceit and hypocrisy and envy and slander. Like newborn babies, long for the pure milk of the word, so that you may grow by it with respect to salvation. That is just like anything that is born. We grow toward a maturity. The maturity that he's talking about is growing toward salvation. Now, the important part of that is that most people look at that baptism, as the end of something. When in reality, it is just the birth process. After that, the absolute necessity of putting on something, gaining weight, gaining strength, gaining knowledge, gaining understanding, comes by longing for the pure milk of the Word, like any child does for his mama. It seems like the whole world has women's parts as something to sell cars with. Or tools. I had a friend back in Washington. He was a heathen. But I love that heathen. His name was Ernie Wetherill. He was a mechanic for the city of Redmond. One day I was in his shop and this guy came in with some calendars. And he was selling tools. But this calendar, I looked at it and I thought, good grief, I need to go. I need my wife. I don't need to be seeing that. This girl was very well endowed, standing there with a drill. And Ernie said, "Get out of my shop. If you think I'm so stupid I'm going to buy that drill because she looks nice, get out of my shop." That's an insult. I thought, wow, this is an independent thinking guy here. I really have a lot of admiration for somebody that's not swayed by stuff like that has nothing to do with the issue. How do you sell drills with women's body parts? But it's the way of the world. That's the way it seems to work. But I'll tell you what, my children knew exactly what those body parts were for. When they got hungry, that's all they wanted was mama. They wanted mama. And she fed them, and they grew. If we understand the concept of longing for the pure milk of the Word, I don't think it was, how long? Every 2 hours? It seemed like it was every 2 hours. Every 4 hours, they're going to be fed. And you better listen, because they're not going to stop screaming until you feed them. How many people are like that as Christians? How many people are that insistent on being fed from the Word of God that every 4 hours you got to have a fix? Long for the pure milk of the Word so that you can grow with respect to salvation. Now, I want you to think about what Solomon said. Let's go back to Proverbs, because in Proverbs, when Solomon ends this thought, there's a beauty to the way he puts it here. I want to go over to chapter 3 of Proverbs. We get to the right book here. In Proverbs chapter 3, starting in verse 13, "How blessed is the man who finds wisdom, the man who gains understanding. For her profit is better than the profit of silver, and her gain better than fine gold. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire compares with her. Long life is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her, and happy are all who hold her fast. The Lord by wisdom founded the earth." Here we go. Back to that statement made in Genesis 1:3. The earth was founded by God's understanding. By understanding, He established the heavens. That is, that He created rules by which everything would operate, so that every year we have 365 plus a few days. And it works that way, and has been working that way for centuries, for thousands of years. Scientists can count on that. They know exactly where things are going to be 100 years from now. Right to the dot they know, because all of those rules work. And they work every time. It says, "The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the deeps were broken up and the skies drip with dew. My son, let them not vanish from your sight. Keep sound wisdom and discretion, so that they will be life to your soul and adornment to your neck. Then you will walk in your way securely, and your foot will not stumble. When you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. Do not be afraid of sudden fear, nor of the onslaught of the wicked when it comes, for the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to do it. Do not say to your neighbor, go and come back and tomorrow I will give it. You know, some people get rich off of withholding what belongs to someone else. But in the end, it doesn't work. He says, do not devise harm against your neighbor while he lives securely beside you. Do not contend with a man without a cause. See how all of this has to do with applying all of the principles of the Bible on a daily basis. In chapter 1, in verse 27, I want us to read. Now let's back up a little bit from 27. Verse 20. Wisdom shouts in the streets. She lifts her voice in the square. At the head of the noisy street she cries out. At the entrance of the gates in the city she utters her sayings. How long, O naive ones, will you love being simple-minded? Anna and I have talked for years about the difference. She says that when I met her, she was dumb. And I said, no, not in the slightest were you dumb. The word naive doesn't mean dumb. The word naive means not exposed to certain things, not experienced in certain things. And you know, we've talked about the difference between people who choose to be naive as opposed to those who just never have seen it. Paul talks about that in Ephesians chapter 4. Describes them as being ignorant because of the hardness of their hearts. Some people just don't want to learn. Some people refuse to learn. Some people refuse to gain understanding from experience, and that's what he's talking about. He says, and scoffers delight themselves in scoffing, and fools hate knowledge. Turn to my reproof. Behold, I will pour out my spirit on you. I will make known my words to you, because I called and you refused. Now, who is this that's talking here? Because I called and you refused. I stretched out my hand and no one paid attention. Who is that talking about? And you neglected all my counsel and did not want my reproof. I will also laugh at your calamity. You know, the first 100 times I read this, I thought that was talking about God. Because God called me and I didn't listen, because God said this and I didn't pay any attention, then God's going to laugh. But that's not what it's saying. I will also mock at your calamity. I'll mock when your dread comes on. When your dread comes like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, then they'll call upon me, but I will not answer. I thought that was God saying He wouldn't listen. But that's not what this is saying. They will seek me diligently, but they will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. They would not accept my counsel. They spurned all my reproof. So they shall eat of the fruit of their own way and be satiated with their own devices. For the waywardness of the naive will kill them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. But he who listens to me shall live securely and will be at ease from the dread of evil. All of this is wisdom. Wisdom is saying this. Wisdom is available. Wisdom is there for the taking if we have the diligence to take it. But if you don't, wisdom's not going to give one hoot or holler when you stumble and fall. Wisdom's not going to care. Wisdom will just keep right on going down the road and laugh at your calamity because wisdom tried to tell us. Wisdom was shouting from the street corners, shouting from every point in life, trying to teach us something. And if we didn't pay attention, wisdom laughs when it goes by. I was so happy to find out that it wasn't God laughing at me. But honestly, there is so much available for us to learn by. How many of you have watched someone and you watch them and you say, they're going to, and just about the time you get that said in your mind, it happens to them? Because somewhere along the line you've learned that that's not a safe thing to do. It talks a lot about prudence in here. Prudence, discretion. I wasn't sure I knew what prudence, the exact definition of prudence. Because being a prude is, that's kind of I don't like the sound of that. But prudence means dealing with things with caution. It means taking precaution. Being careful as opposed to careless. We've got a lot of words that talk about these kind of things. Like understanding. Standing under, having a foundation for what you think. I think, well, what is that based on? What is your thinking based on? What is the foundation under your thinking? Do you have a reason for why you think the way you do? Or is it just that's the way it's always been? We need to back up and look at everything we think and compare it to what the Bible teaches. Compare it to the wisdom that is so readily available. And not all of the wisdom comes from the Bible, but all of the wisdom comes from God. Everything that you see around you, you see somebody that's on drugs. You watch them. You understand certain things lead to certain things that lead to certain things. Now you can say where it's going to stop by where it starts if you've been paying attention. There are things that we can learn about life, and I'll tell you what, there are times that my kids think I'm a prophet. And they don't like to hear it because I say, this is what's going to, oh yes it did, it happened. Almost before I get it out of my mouth, it's happening to them just exactly the way I say it's going to happen. And it's not because I'm a prophet. It's because I've been watching. I've been paying attention. It's because there is wisdom out there to be learned, to be had, if we're willing. If we're willing. So, the book of Proverbs, it's a shortcut to wisdom. You don't have to go through the school of hard knocks to learn those things because it's available. We just have to pay attention. Do you pay attention? I would really love for us to establish a very serious system of Bible study where we go through the entire Bible every 4 years. We've taught every book, we've taught every situation that the Bible presents every 4 years. We need to do that because we've got a lot of people in this area that need the wisdom that this book provides. Consider those things. And if your life is not right before God this morning, if you know that your life is not based on the light that comes from Him, the rules of order that were established before the creation, if you know that you need to make changes, won't you do so this morning while we stand and sing the song that's been announced?